All right. Turn to Habakkuk. Habakkuk chapter number 1. Habakkuk chapter number 1. Habakkuk chapter number 1. Some of the minor prophets are difficult and tricky to get the head around. I found Nahum a little bit difficult, what we just finished, to get a clear thought and to get a clear idea out of it. Habakkuk, I think, is easier. I think this is an easier thought. It's a bit clearer in what's being said. And it also helps as well when the New Testament makes multiple references to the book, because it unlocks and opens it, and you see how the New Testament writers used the minor prophets. And Habakkuk is one such book. Paul uses the book of Habakkuk on numerous occasions, and we're going to come to that next week with the use of Paul's use of the book of Habakkuk. But we're going to read chapter number 1. Follow along as I read. It says, "The burden which Habakkuk the prophet did see." If it's a burden, it's weighty, it's heavy, it's burdensome, and this is what this is. Nahum was the same. It was a heavy vision that was seen. "The burden which Habakkuk the prophet did see. O Lord, how long shall I cry, and thou wilt not hear? Even cry out unto thee of violence, and thou wilt not save. Why dost thou show me iniquity, and cause me to behold grievance? For spoiling and violence are before me, and there are that rise up strife and and there are they that rise up strife and contention. Therefore the law is slacked, and judgment doth never go forth. For the wicked doth compass about the righteous, therefore wrong judgment proceedeth. Behold ye among the heathen, and regard and wonder marvelously, for I will work a work in your days which ye will not believe, though it be told you. For lo, I raise up the Chaldeans, that bitter and hasty nation, which shall march through the breadth of the land to possess the dwelling places that are not theirs. They are terrible and dreadful. Their judgment and their dignity shall proceed of themselves. Their horses also are swifter than the leopards, and are more fierce than the evening wolves. And their horsemen shall spread themselves, and their horsemen shall come from far. They shall fly as the eagle that hasteth to eat. They shall come all for violence, their faces shall sup up as the east wind, and they shall gather the captivity as the sand, and they shall scoff at the kings, and the princes shall be a scorn unto them. They shall deride every stronghold, for they shall heap dust and take it. Then shall his mind change, and he shall pass over and offend, imputing this his power unto his God. Art thou not from everlasting, O Lord, my God, mine Holy One? We shall not die, O Lord. Thou hast ordained them for judgment. And, O mighty God, thou hast established them for correction. Thou art purer eyes than to behold evil, canst not look on iniquity. Wherefore lookest thou upon them that deal treacherously, and holdest thy tongue, when the wicked devoureth the man that is more righteous than he? And makest men as the fishes of the sea, as the creeping things that have no ruler over them? They take up all of them with the angle. They catch them in their net, and they gather them in their drag. Therefore they rejoice and are glad. Therefore they sacrifice under their net, and burn incense under their drag, because by them their portion is fat, and their meat plenteous. Shall they therefore empty their net, and not spare continually to slay the nations? This is Habakkuk. It's his burden. It's burdensome to him. It's heavy. What he saw was heavy. It was difficult to bear up. Habakkuk exists, and his ministry seems to be about the time of Jeconiah, the king, King Jeconiah, which is the same sort of period of time as Jeremiah. So we are in the period, the 7th century BC, sort of right near by the time that Nebuchadnezzar and his Chaldean army rises up, and he is probably seeing it starting to rise up and maybe seeing the Chaldeans taking over some nations and some kingdoms, and can see the writing on the wall. And now God has given him a vision that that enemy is going to march through the lands of Judah, wicked and evil and vile and violent, and he sees it coming. And he's trying to rationalize and deal with it in his own mind and in his own heart what he has seen and what God says will happen. And he's really asking this: God, why? Why are you allowing a nation more wicked than this nation, though we're guilty? Why are you allowing an even more vile and wicked nation to triumph over the just and the godly? Habakkuk can't comprehend what's about to happen. That's what you're reading here. Any thoughts here? I think he's just saying about the wicked in general, but the Chaldeans in specifics. Like he says, we are the eternal people. We're your people. They're the heathen. They're the wicked. They're the ones who've turned their back on you. They're the ones that ultimately are going to get corrected. They're ultimately the ones that have the judgment of God upon them. We shall not die, but God, what are you doing here? But in this case, in what you're working, it's your kids that are going to be dying, and it's the wicked that are going to be prospering, and it's all going to be done at the hand of God. God's going to allow it all. I think that's what he's saying. Yeah, either way, the way I've read it and the way I've studied it is the other way, that he is saying, trying to get his mind around, why is a more vile and more wicked nation, which God will ultimately judge, and God will bring judgment upon them, why is he using them to be the ones to bring correction? Like shouldn't it be someone more right? Shouldn't it be the righteous that correct? But he's using the wicked to correct. It's messing with Habakkuk's worldview. Ben. I have no idea. I'm not sure on that. No. I mean, it's likely that he's from the tribe of Judah, because by this stage in Israel's history, the northern kingdom, Samaria, Israel, has already been taken captive by the Assyrians, and have been, the northern kingdom has been repopulated with other people, which means it's just Judah, really. The southern kingdom, Judah and Benjamin, I think, is the other one. So there's a real possibility that he is from Judah. But I don't know. I didn't. There's one for you. Yeah, just the speed and the ferocity and the fierceness, I think, is what he is. I agree. It's the fierceness and the quickness, and just in Joel's day, he was referring to them as the locusts, and the locusts come up, and when a whole army comes through, the locusts come up over the windows and in everywhere. And he says that's kind of how the Chaldeans are going to come in and just flood in to the city. And I think Habakkuk sees that same sort of image, swift as leopards on their horses and fierce as the evening wolves. And the horsemen, they spread themselves and they fly across as the eagle. I think everything about that is quick and fast and severe. All the leopard, the evening wolf, and the eagle are all swift in their hunting. And I think that's what he's seeing, that the Chaldeans are going to be hunting. And the prey is Jerusalem and Judah. Which is what Habakkuk is he's like, God, why have you let me see this? Why have I seen this, and you're not going to like, you're going to allow this to happen? Why? And there's great, I have, for me, some of these things, when the church went through the 6-7 years ago, whatever it was, and our church went through an upheaval and a splitting and a tearing and going in different directions, it was this sort of verse that jumped out at me that I was sort of asking, like, God, why? Why are you allowing these things to happen? Why can't you fix these things and heal over and mend? And why must it be a rending and a tearing and a ripping as it's going on? But God does things to His ways. And we don't always have the answers in how we want them to be. In fact, look at verse 5. He says, "Behold ye among the heathen, regard and wonder marvelously, for I will work a work in your days, which ye will not believe, though it be told you." So I'm not going to believe what God is doing, but God is the one working the work. Whether you really regard what's happening or not, whether you are even told what God is doing, He says, you wouldn't even believe what I'm doing, because of the what's taking place, and God works His works, and He does work a work there, and Israel came out different out of the captivity than it went in. It came out. There was the prophecies of the last part of the Old Testament come out of after the captivity. You have the synagogue that rose up during the time of the captivity, which the local church is pretty much a carbon copy of the old synagogues. It's where it comes from, this old assembling together that we're even doing right now to pray and have the Word of God. That comes from the synagogues, which came out of the time in the captivity that they went into. But Israel also came out of that strictly monotheistic. They went in polytheistic into captivity, and they came out strictly monotheistic. And even to this day, they are absolutely one God to Israel. Never are they a little bit of this and a little bit of that and whatever is going around. The captivity, absolutely, they became teachers, as they ought to have been, of the one God of Israel out of the captivity. And God worked to work in their day and brought those things to pass. But Paul uses verse 5 in Acts when he says about Jesus. He says, beware lest you end up like the prophets have warned, that God will work a work in your day that you don't even believe. And he was saying, God is working a work through Jesus, and you need to believe what God is doing through Jesus, lest you be like them, that they don't believe that God is the one at work here. Which is what was taking place here in the book of in the life of Habakkuk. But the overwhelming question in verse 3 and the first word, why? Why would you allow such things to happen? These Chaldeans are vile, wicked people. They scoff, they mock. And verse 11 says that he is going to have all this power over the nations, and then he is going to attribute it to his God and say, what a great God we, the Chaldeans, serve. And Habakkuk is saying, why are you allowing these things to take place, God? Why do you allow such injustice? Why do you allow these things? But God again is saying, I have my purposes. I have my reasons. I have my ways. And Nebuchadnezzar, God calls him my servant. Even though Nebuchadnezzar is thumbing his nose at the one true God and he is absolutely out for the power of this world, God says, right, but he is still working in accordance to my decreed plans, even though Nebuchadnezzar is operating of his free will. It's still, we were talking about this in Bible Institute last night, it still operates within the sovereignty of God who reigns over all, and this is still taking place under the watchful, careful eye of God. Verse 14 sort of has the mindset of, gives you a picture of what the Chaldeans thought. Verse 14 says, and he maketh men as the fish of the sea, as the creeping things that have no ruler over them. He's just casting out a net and he's grabbing men drawing men in, and they take up all of them with the angle. They catch them in their net and they gather them in their drag. Therefore they rejoice and are glad. Look how many men we've caught. They're catching men like men would catch fish and say, look how many fish we caught. What a great catch. And the Chaldeans are doing that to humanity casting with their armies, gathering in all the people. When they went through Jerusalem, they gathered in all the good princes and all of the people, and they took them all back like they were trophies, like they were merely fish to be taken back to the markets. And he says, God, you're going to use these people who have such a disregard for humanity and people and men and women and children, as such a disregard, you're going to use them to judge us? And Habakkuk found it very difficult to get his mind around. And he says they even sacrificed to their net and to their drag. Verse 2, chapter 2 begins like this, to give you a head start on next week. But chapter 2 says this, Habakkuk, in his trying to understand and questioning God, he says, I will stand upon my watch and set me upon the tower, and I will watch to see what he will say unto me, and what I shall answer when I am reproved. Like he says, God, I have an issue with how you are choosing to enact judgment. God, I have an issue with how you are choosing to rule. That's where Habakkuk is in his life right now. You ever got there in your life? You ever come to a place in your life, you're like, God, I actually have an issue with what you're allowing to take place. I have an issue with how things are playing out and what you're doing and who you're using and how things are taking place. God, I have an issue here, and I'm going to take a sit down, sort of like you remember Jonah, where he sat underneath the gourd and he says, all right, God, I'm sitting here until you make these things, you do what I think you ought to do. I'm going to hold you to account. And God came along to Jonah and says, no, actually, I'm going to hold you to account. You're not going to hold me to account. And Habakkuk is sort of in that same way, where he's sitting down. Some would say he's the smallest man in the Bible. He sat down stood on his watch. Little. But he stood there. You had to wake up on a Wednesday night. But he stood there on a purpose to say, God, I'm going to sit down here and I'm going to take umbrance with you. And I'm going to, I don't agree, God, I don't agree. And I'm going to sit here and I'm going to wait to be reproved of you, God, because I know I'm out of line to question you, but I just don't like what you're doing right now. And that's Habakkuk. So if you ever get to that place in life, know this, you're not the first one to arrive at that ground. And just say, all right, God, I'm sitting right where I am and I demand of you an answer. He's there. Well, that's what he's saying. He's like, God, I don't understand. I don't get it. I don't like what you're doing here. And I don't agree. And I don't know why. But there's an answer that he gives in chapter 2 that is paramount to the New Testament, which we'll come to next week. Read chapter 2 of the story of Habakkuk, and it'll start to unlock itself as you read through. A very important verse in chapter number 2 that we will come to. The just shall live by faith. That's what God gives to Habakkuk. I'm telling you in advance here so you can come prepared next week. So riveting and so central is that point that Paul uses it again and again and again. And so when you get to the place where Habakkuk is, the answer is, the just shall live by faith. I don't have to understand why, God, I just trust you. I just trust you through it and in it. But we'll look more in depth to that next week. Find a prayer partner or two tonight.